Well, to talk about the foreign interference inquiry and the other stories of this week, we're now joined by our journalist panel. Tonda MacCharles is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse, and Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Thank you to the three of you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So, nice seeing you too. Let's begin here with the Hogue Commission, because as we know, eventually it's going to be looking into the 2019-2021 election, the allegations of foreign meddling from countries allegedly like China, India, as well as Russia. But this first week was really about sorting out what we're going to hear, a bit of the parameters of what will take place when it really gets into the nitty-gritty of all of this. Given what we did here, how transparent do you think this commission's actually going to be for the Canadian public?
I think that's a work in progress. That's what remains to be seen. It's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the whole point of the commission is to shed some light on a problem and to reveal to the Canadian public what interference took place in the last couple of elections and the scope of the problem. And given the signals we're getting about how much secrecy still has to shroud all those documents, you know, it's an open question. I think the proof will be when we see what can come forward in unredacted form. Already, the few documents that have been tabled there have, I think, set up some red flags for Canadians, but lots of secrecy still surrounds it.
You're nodding.
Yeah, still, I think this was a necessary educational exercise this week to explain to Canadians what may happen, so that we they are not shocked by what will result from this commission. And it's because it's true that about 80% of the documents that have been, will be seen by the commission will be highly secret. So it's the information obtained by CSIS through its allies in the Five Eyes countries that need to be protected so that our spies can continue to do their work. But so I think it was laying the groundwork for explaining to Canadians what they might be deceived by the number of documents that will be eventually released because of the sensitive nature of those documents.
Bob?
Well, it wasn't very encouraging this week because you heard officials complaining that it took 200 hours to go through these 13 documents in which they redacted most of them, and basically saying, "Oh, you don't keep asking us to do this because we aren't going to be able to do it." Fortunately, the public safety minister said today that the government will honor whatever the commissioner wants in terms of trying to get redacted documents out to the public. But I think the most likely thing you're going to get is summaries of what the testimony is, and that itself is going to have to be worked out with government officials, even the summaries. So I'm very concerned that we may not get at the heart of a lot of the foreign interference. The participants who are granted standing, we had very powerful arguments at the end of the Commission's hearings on Friday, making the case that this is a public inquiry. The best way to deal with foreign interference is sunlight and transparency, and you must get as much information out to the public as possible, and be very, very careful, Commissioner Hogue, that you aren't getting snowed by the politicians who don't, or security officials who don't want to, are covering up how they mishandled things. For example, the case of why wasn't Michael Chung, the Conservative MP, notified in 2021 election campaign that he was being targeted by China? Wasn't Aaron O'Toole, then the official opposition leader, why wasn't he told? Why wasn't NDP MP Jenny Kwan not told about that? So this is really, really important. And also in the case of Han Dong, I think his lawyer made a good argument today as well that David Johnson said the accusations that Global News had made against him were false, and he wants to make sure that his reputation can be cleared up in this inquiry, and that seems to be a fair point as well.
I just want to say, though, I think it's incumbent on all of us watching to be clear that it's hard at this point to say we're not going to get at the heart of this issue, because while a lot of the documents may not be made public, one thing that we all know from this week's testimony is that the Commission itself, the judge and all her counsel, all her lawyers, are going to have access to the completely unredacted version of all of those documents. The question of transparency goes to, I think, a bit of restoring public confidence in the system. But it doesn't necessarily go to the question of whether this judge and her team can get to the heart of the issue. What might go to that is whether or not they get evidence brought forward from diaspora groups, Canadians who've been the target and victims of foreign interference, who are right now concerned that they may not have enough protection to come forward publicly and speak to that issue.
Well, to that, and there are already early problems, right? In the papers, you were noting it. I was reading your article earlier this week, Bob, that, for example, the Uyghur group has pulled out of this commission. The Conservative Party has their questions, which leads me to wonder whether or not this inquiry will satisfy Canadians in a way that David Johnston, as the special rapporteur, did not.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, it depends, I think, on to what extent the judge herself feels she's been able to get to the heart of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they were saying today. The people at grandstanding that Mr. Johnson lacked credibility. The public didn't trust the results of that. And that's why this public inquiry is really important, that she can have the trust of the public that she's going to release as much information as she can, or certainly to assure the public. I mean, look, she's a judge, she's nonpartisan. I mean, we have to have faith that she's going to get to the bottom of this.
One of the other obstacles is the tight deadline under which that commission is working. I mean, produce a full report on what did possibly China, India, and Russia, a report that should be tabled on May the 3rd is a very, very tight deadline. And the final report, that's the interim report, but the final report at the end of December, that's another tight deadline. And I think the Commission and also I think the government is working with the option, in the optics that there's a federal election that will probably take place in 2025, and if there needs to be new measures adopted by the government to protect our democracy against foreign influence, it needs to be in place before the next federal election.
Yeah, of course. So watching that one closely. But listen, I also want to move into some other topics covered this past week, beginning with medically assisted death for mental illness, because we know that the government started the week saying they're going to push it back. They ended up pushing it back to 2027, many years from now. Although the dissenting opinion from a group of senators said, the federal government could have just changed the criminal code, move the ball a little bit further down the field while provinces and other jurisdictions caught up. Do you think that's a move that should have been pursued? Do you think that could have been pursued in this current environment?
Look, I think the one thing that argues for the government's at least intent to delay it somewhat is the fact that the provinces and some of the, all of the provinces and some of the associations like the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Centre for Addictions and Mental Health, that they backed a delay and said the system wasn't ready. What argued against the government's move on this is that the regulators across this country of the health profession say they are ready. And, the senator's point was that this committee wasn't looking at the whole medical system, whether it's ready. It was looking at whether the federal government had done its work on setting national guidelines in several areas, and it had. So they've put it, though, down the road 3 years, which is an astonishing amount of time for the right to at least apply for medically assisted death for those who solely suffer from a mental illness, which is a right that courts in this country have said they have, that have interpreted the law and the rights under the Charter to mean that those people do have at least the right to apply and be assessed for that. And right now the government's put that off the table, which means like 3 years. That's a long time.
And it gives time to people who are demanding that kind of access, time to go to the courts and seek a judgment that would force, again, the government to act. So that's a problem, could be problematic, because 3 years is enough time to contest this kind of decision by the federal government. But obviously, the Liberal government wanted to push, or pelleter, as we say in French, punt, yes, after the next federal election, any controversial issues that may deal with ethical issues, and that's one of those issues.
Mm-hmm. So a political move you're seeing in that. Bob, what's your reaction to it?
I think it's a total political move on their behalf. They don't want to fight an election campaign with, because it's a hard issue to understand for a lot of people. And they don't want Pierre Poilievre out there saying, oh, they're going to, if you have mental problems, you can go and get your family members can, have you medically assisted to die. I mean, that is like, and don't put it past them to do it. He would do it. So, and I think so from their point of view, it's a smart move. Let's just push this thing down the road because we just don't need to fight a political issue over it like that. It's a very sensitive subject to begin with.
I think it does ensure, though, that it is going to be the subject of political questions in a campaign where parties stand on it. So in actual fact, it doesn't delay the political conversation. The political conversation has been had at many levels in Parliament over the past several years. And you could also argue that basically lawmakers and politicians in Parliament are in the best position to make a social call like this than a judge on a court. So,
and it's funny because, paradoxal, because the former Justice Minister, David Lametti, said before leaving that he thinks that we should go ahead with that. And so he left politics this week, but with some kind of a lot of comments that I think are stirring some reactions within the Liberal ranks, but also within the population as a whole.
Yeah, what's interesting is that, of course, it had already been delayed. It's now going to get this other delay. And I was speaking to Anne McGrath yesterday, the NDP now Principal Secretary to Jagmeet Singh, and she said, well, her hope is, whether she actually agrees that perhaps it's good to take some time to think about it, but she hopes that it's actually dealt with not in the last month of 2027 to force another pushback X number of years. I'm sad to say that is the time that we have for this week, but really glad to see the three of you again. Looking forward to getting into the groove of things. Tonda, Joël-Denis, Bob, thank you for the time.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Michael.
You too.